you notice that on weeks in Westminster where it seems everything has been set on fire, you were the one sitting in the seat on Sunday? Are you Number 10's human fire blanket?
I'm sure it's entirely coincidental. I mean, I come on your programme from time to time. That was on very recently, and I don't recall anything specific. But I'm always pleased to come on your programme.
I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, the Dominic Cummings story, the week after the local election results, the week after Boris Johnson dramatically quitting Parliament, and this is a Grant Shapps week. I mean, things are serious.
Look, I'm always pleased when you invite me on. I'm very happy to discuss the issues of the day, so it's good to be here.
So I guess the human fire blanket today will tell us that everything is fine in the Conservative Party and what's happening with Boris Johnson is just a distraction.
Well, look, I think people around the country, inside and outside the party, will recognise that Boris is somebody with many qualities, but we are now in a world where there are different challenges to face, and we've got new management in Number 10 getting on with the job and getting on with the priorities of this country, like, growing the economy and stopping the small boats, where we've seen some success. So I think the world has sort of moved on from what was quite a dramatic period under Brexit and, of course, under the issues related to COVID and the vaccine and the rest of it.
So do you think the world's moved on from Boris Johnson?
Well, I mean, just factually speaking, Boris Johnson's no longer Prime Minister. And, as I say, I think people appreciate... I like Boris Johnson. I worked under his administration. He had successes, many successes to his name, including breaking the Brexit impasse and including getting this country vaccinated first. But there was also always a lot of drama that came with all of that. The world has moved on, not least because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the high levels of inflation that created, and so things like fighting inflation and growing the economy, and the things that Rishi Sunak is focused on now. And it has to be said, having some success with things like reducing the number of small boats. We've seen them down 20% this year. I think the world has moved on in that regard. You say that there was always a lot of drama around Boris Johnson, which is a bit of an understatement, really. Are you hoping that now some of that drama, the soap opera, if you like, will come to an end? Well, my sense is that what people want are basically the 5 priorities that this Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak,
I was wondering how long
out.
it would be till you got to that.
There we go. Yes.
So someone on Twitter said, please don't let him say what the 5 priorities are unless you specifically ask what are the 5 priorities.
I won't give you a list, but I will say that things like stopping the small boats, as I mentioned, are really important. And we're having success in that, right? The numbers are down 20%.
Do you remember?
Yes, I mean, are we moving on? Has the world moved? Yes, of course it's moved on. And these are things are facts, aren't they? Boris Johnson has now said that he is stepping down as an MP. So, yes, factually, things have moved on.
Now, according to the newspapers this morning, this all stems partly from a meeting 9 days ago between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson's allies are accusing Rishi Sunak of effectively going back on his word and not allowing through the people that Boris Johnson, or all of the people that Boris Johnson wanted to nominate for peerages.
Well, look, I don't want to comment on individual meetings that I wasn't at. I can't confirm that either way. What I can say for certain is that Rishi Sunak has not changed, altered the list in any way. In fact, there is a House of Commons Appointments Commission, or HOLAC, as it's called, which looks at all nominations. There's a very, very long-tested sort of protocol in place where former Prime Ministers put people up for the House of Lords. I think I'm right in saying that Gordon Brown put up about 50 people in his nominations list, and the Prime Minister who comes in usually passes it on. In this particular case, because Number 10's actually published the details, you can see that Rishi did not change that list at all. The House of Commons Commission will have made all of those decisions, and the Prime Minister has not intervened in any way.
Do you think Boris Johnson didn't understand the details then? Is that what you're saying?
Occasionally, Boris wouldn't be all over the detail. I don't know whether that's what happened in this particular case.
OK. Of course, the real trigger was Boris Johnson receiving the findings of the Privileges Committee report into whether he misled Parliament over Partygate. He says it's a kangaroo court. He says it's a witch hunt. Do you agree with him?
Well, look, Boris has seen this report. I haven't. Other MPs haven't seen the report yet. So I have to get receipt of that. There's a formal process that's put in place. I don't want to undermine Parliament itself, which is what coming to that conclusion would do.
So hang on, so you say, coming to the conclusion that the Privileges Committee is a kangaroo court or a witch hunt would be undermining Parliament?
Well, Parliament itself sets up these committees, and they are set up in proportion to the current makeup of Parliament, which is, I don't know, 54% Conservative. So there'll be Conservatives on that committee.
So you're saying that Boris Johnson's undermining Parliament?
I'm simply saying I haven't seen that report. Only Boris has seen it, so I don't know quite what he's getting at when he says that. I haven't seen the report, I haven't seen the evidence they presented. What I do believe is it's very important to let committees get on with their work. I think the point of a member being sent details in advance, as has happened with Boris, is that it gives somebody the opportunity to comment on it and say, no, this is an inaccuracy here, or what have you, and challenge elements before it's published. As I say, I haven't seen it, so you're asking me to comment on something I haven't seen. Do I think that the process is proper? Well, that's a decision for Parliament, not the government, but Parliament and MPs to decide themselves. And this is the process that MPs have collectively decided should be in place in situations like this.
So Boris Johnson, in his resignation letter, says there is a witch hunt underway to take revenge for Brexit and ultimately to reverse the 2016 referendum result.
I definitely don't feel that way. I think I'm somebody who thinks that... I actually happen to vote for Brexit as it happens, but I actually do think it's working in favour for this country. I'm seeing how we're now able to move much faster in getting on with the job in lots of different ways, changing rules which enable us to bring in more innovative tech and actually use the advantages of being outside of the EU, but working very closely with our neighbours and friends. So I think, far from wanting to undo it, I think we're in a phase now of using the many benefits of having that extra flexibility. So, no, I don't think that's the case.
I don't want to get into a row about whether or not Brexit's working or not, but just to say, you're not the only person, not all of your colleagues agree with you on the treatment of Boris Johnson and the committee report. I just want to have a look at Jake Berry MP, who tweeted to say this: you voted for Brexit. He's talking about the reader, if you like. You voted for Brexit, the establishment blocked it. You voted for Boris Johnson, the establishment forced him out. Who is in charge here, the voters or the blob? Do you agree with Jake Berry?
No. Actually, in the end, Boris was perfectly entitled to remain as an MP. He has decided to stand down, and a couple of my other colleagues, all of whom I should say I work with, and Boris in particular, I liked working with him as Prime Minister. But, as I said right at the beginning of this, the world has moved on. He is the one who's removed himself from the current sort of political scene, standing down as a Member of Parliament, and we've got excellent leadership in place in number 10 with Rishi Sunak.
I guess what Jake Berry and other supporters are saying is that they feel it's undemocratic. Boris Johnson won an election landslide, unlike Rishi Sunak, by the way, who hasn't got his mandate from the electorate in the same way that Boris Johnson did. He was elected by the voters in his constituency of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. And once again, they feel it's MPs, it's his own side almost forcing him out, not the public.
Well, as I say, only Boris Johnson himself can make the decision, as he's done, to stand down from Parliament. No one has asked.
Well, they've said
so.
the Privileges Committee is going to give, if we understand it correctly, is going to give him a suspension that is so long he'd have to face a by-election.
Well, as I say, he's had the benefit of seeing that committee report. It's a parliamentary committee. It's not something the government is doing. And so these things are Boris Johnson's decision to do. I think actually, when you look at, and I'm not going to list the 5 priorities, but if you look at the priorities of this country, getting on with the job after, COVID and a war in Ukraine and very high inflation, those are the things that people are really concerned about. And those are the things that this Prime Minister is focused on. Rishi Sunak's
well, if he's not doing a very good job, is he, if you look at the polls? I mean, in the resignation letter, the one thing that Boris Johnson does unarguably get right is that when he left office last year, the government was a handful of points behind in the polls. That gap's widened. Just a few years after winning the biggest majority in almost half a century, that majority is now clearly at risk. You cannot argue with that.
And
so if you basically say that Rishi Sunak is getting on with the job, is in tune with what people want, what they're saying is, we don't really like what's happening.
I was going to say, that's not quite the full story, is it? Because if you recall last summer, there were rather a lot of different changes, including another Prime Minister as well. And that's when we were a very, very long way behind in the polls, over 30 points behind. We know from the local elections where I think we were 9 points behind. It's actually a lot closer.
Oh, come on, the local elections were poor.
Well, even if you want to use the same basis, say the polling was 30 points behind and it's now, say, 15 points behind. In other words, Rishi Sunak focusing on people's actual priorities, stopping the small boats and growing the economy and the rest of it, means that actually we are seeing that poll gap narrow. But let's just be absolutely clear, and I know you won't want me to talk about the other option, which is a Keir Starmer government, but the reality is we have very low unemployment in this country, near record levels of high employment. All of that's happened under a Conservative government, and there's never been a Labour government that hasn't left unemployment higher in history. And so that's the real challenge here, is to make sure we can preserve the things which are working, like a lot of jobs available in our economy. Do
you think Boris Johnson will come back?
I have. The one thing I know about Boris Johnson is never predict what Boris Johnson will do next. So I have no idea what will happen with regards to that.
Would you like him to?
I do know. I'm sure he's got many other things he wants to get on to do.
That doesn't sound like you're really gagging.
I was going to say, he spent a huge amount of... he's spending a lot of time around the world making a lot of...
So that's what you want him to do, leave the country, speeches. Not just Parliament?
As I say, you won't find me saying bad things about Boris. I enjoyed working with Boris. I thought he was the right man for that time, particularly to break that Brexit impasse, which he successfully did. I thought he was very good in leadership of the world in Ukraine after the invasion and other things. But a lot of drama came with it. We've got a series of very important things that we're focused on now, like reducing inflation and growing the economy. And those things are starting to work. We see Germany in recession, the Eurozone in recession, this country actually escaping recession because we've got the right measures in place under Rishi.
I think lots of people would say that if you look at the economic situation, if you really want to go down the argument about what economic situation we're in, with a mortgage sort of time bomb, inflation much stickier than expected, I'm not sure that that's really the strong point that you would be fighting for, and zero growth.
Well, I just say, first of all, it's not zero growth. We just had the biggest upgrade of any country in, I think, the IMF.
Flatlining growth in the UK?
No, they're actually predicting growth this year.
Of growth of what?
I think 0.5%, 0.7% is possible, depending on which economists you follow. Remember that 6 months ago they said that we would be in recession. Remember that Germany is in recession, that the Eurozone is in recession. And I know there's a kind of desire to sort of constantly say somehow that we're doing worse than everyone else. Our economy grew faster than the G7 last year and the year before, and we'll be right up there this year.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is we have 0.5% growth predicted, inflation running around 10%. This is a fall in real incomes, and it's really difficult for people right now. And I don't think we should necessarily be, rubbing our hands about the state of the economy.
I'm not in any way, shape or form saying that. I am saying that things like unemployment are great achievements. Okay. But that's why the first on the list of 5 that you won't allow me to mention is to get to halve inflation. And it is why, inflation's like a tax on people. It is why we're working so hard on that. It's why Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, and Rishi are so focused on that as their first priority. It costs everybody when inflation's high, and that's why we're pressing down on it.
You've got a couple of by-elections coming up now, because not only is Boris Johnson standing down, but 2 of his key allies are as well. Could be pretty tricky, particularly in Uxbridge. I mean, you're a former party chair. How confident are you feeling about that?
Yeah, look, we will fight for every vote, as every former and current party chair will tell you. And we'll be presenting our message. And what we'll be saying to people in Uxbridge or elsewhere is, look, since the only other viable option to run the country is Keir Starmer, or a combination of him and the Lib Dems and the SNP, goodness knows what else, know what you're voting for, which just in the last week, we've seen Labour either pledging or not pledging £28 billion of tax and spend on a programme which is in a mess, and doing whatever Just Stop Oil tell them should be their policy on energy, my area, which would cost families a fortune. That £28 billion pledge is about £1,000 per family. They want to put our energy policy in the hands of people like Putin.
They would argue, I mean, look, I'm going to talk about the 28 billion policy with Labour, as you'd expect, but they would argue, look, this is actually about energy security, something that people really care about, and it's also about creating 500,000 jobs.
And it's extraordinary that their actual policy would create energy insecurity, make us reliant on tyrants like Putin by importing gas and oil that we need still as we make that transition to net zero. We end up importing it from abroad. And worse still, we double the carbon. It's a completely illiterate policy that they've got from their Just Stop Oil friends.
Well, we'll talk about that policy with Labour. I just want to talk to you about one of your policies as well, if I may, because there has been some criticism by Boris Johnson for Rishi Sunak not following through with some of his plans. It feels like one of them could be the plan for Great British Railways. I mean, that's your baby. You're trying to fix the way that railways are fragmented, if you like. And the Times have reported that it won't be in the King's Speech. It's being watered down, no legislative powers to sign off contracts to set fares. Are you a bit worried?
So just to be absolutely clear, Great British Railways is happening, as I understand it. I'm no longer Transport Secretary. You can have the Transport Secretary talk about it, but it is happening. It is a different way to arrange the railways. An awful lot of what's required doesn't require a major act of Parliament immediately to get that going. So the body itself is being established. I think it's going to be based in Derby. The competition was announced for the headquarters. A lot of what's required can be done by repurposing the kind of vehicles that are already there. So I think the question of at what point do you have to pass the so-called primary legislation through Parliament is separate to getting on with the job of reorganising the way the railways run, and that's continuing.
OK, the thing that you want to talk about today is more funding to support people with health issues to stay at work. What's the idea?
Look, we have, as I say, a great track record on employment, but we're also aware, and particularly post-COVID, of people who've found it difficult to stay in the workplace or are dropping out of the workplace. The funding that we're making available to ensure that people can stay in work and are supported to do so. We think where people can be economically active, it's better for them, it's better for their health, it's better for the economy as well.
OK, and just finally, we're going to be talking to the BMA later on the programme because, of course, junior doctors are striking next week, part of a long-running dispute. We'll get their view later, but what's your message to them?
Simply this, first of all, to the whole of the health service and the NHS, we really want to see this service working for people. Is why one of the pledges that I won't mention is to cut the waiting lists, which I won't list in detail, but just cut the waiting lists. And one of the things we need to do as a responsible government is press down on inflation as well. We can't be in a situation where we end up in a spiral of pay claims which bust inflation and end up in a position where we never get inflation out of the system. So it's about coming to a fair settlement, both for the junior doctors and for the rest of the public service, and frankly, people who don't work in the public service, to make sure that we are getting that balance right. And that's what we're trying to do. I really hope that these industrial disputes can be brought to a close so we can all get on with the things we're trying to do. For example, we've got rid of the 2-year waits. We've got rid of 90% of the 18-month waits. We're making progress with the NHS recovery plan post-COVID.